Hi Eagles, welcome back to another episode of our podcast, The West Wing Beneath the Black, Teal, and Gold. I'm your host, Mia Montillano, and also your ASB President. And we're going to go around the table and introduce ourselves, name, commissionership if you're an ASB, and if you were to describe how you're feeling right now with one color, what would it be and why? So for me, I feel like I would be neon yellow because neon yellow really stresses me out, and I'm like under a lot of pressure. So yeah. Turning it over to Dean.
Hello, I'm Dean Tech. I actually don't know. Maybe like a nice like pastel yellow, sort of like on alert, but like kind of chill at the same time. Yeah. And then.
Hi everybody.
Go ahead.
Okay. Hi everybody, my name is Adrielle Escano. I'm your ASB Vice President, and the color I chose to represent myself is like a lavender, because like a really like go with the flow kind of vibe. That's how I'm feeling right now.
Hi guys, my name is Isabel, and my commissionership is service. And one color I would describe myself right now would be like baby blue, because I view blue as like more of a calming color, and I'm more like, and I like to view like light things. So yeah.
Oh hi, my name is Deondre Battle, and I'm not in ASB unfortunately, but and I would describe myself. I would say a deep blue because I'm very calm and content and kind of like I'm kind of chilled out today. So.
You like cobalt blue? I like cobalt.
Yeah. Cobalt's a really nice color.
Yes, Deondre is our second guest speaker. Thank you so much for joining us today. Super excited to have you and for our discussion that we're going to have today. So in order to get to know a little bit more about you, we're going to be doing our segment, The Fiery Five. So if you don't know how that works, listeners, the way that it works is Dean is going to be setting a 1-minute timer, and within those 1 minutes, Adrielle is going to be interviewing Deondre with a bunch of rapid fire questions that he has to answer in 5 words or less. And the object of the game is just to answer as many questions as possible with as much depth as possible. Alright, so Dean, let me know when the timer is ready to go.
Yeah, I'm ready with the timer. Adrielle, are you ready with the questions?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Start in 3, 2, 1.
Would you like to be famous, and in what way?
Yes, but not too much.
Before making a phone call, do you ever rehearse what you're going to say? And why?
Because it gets awkward.
What would you say your perfect day is?
Music, love, anime, relaxation, and sunshine.
What was the last song you sang to yourself?
Too much love for you.
What are you most grateful for in your life?
Family, friends.
Yikes.
Well, I'm surprised I got through one.
I like those answers. Thank you. All right, so on that note of answering questions, a bunch of questions, we are going to transition into answering our student-submitted topic for this week. So this topic is from Justin Blanco. He's a senior. Thank you, Justin, for submitting. And he asked us, as an optimist myself, it can be difficult to uphold that mindset in our world, especially during this year. Felt that. What do you personally see as the best mindset when attacking life, an optimistic and passionate side, or a more realistic and settling side? People can often debate between one being unrealistic over the other, so I would like to hear what you have to say. That's a loaded question.
Yeah, that is a very loaded question. And like for me personally, like I have a positive attitude towards life because, like, not only because like no. you get in life what you put out. And every day I just try and put in a lot of positivity into my friends. You know, I check up on my friends, try to see everyone's okay. If not, doing work through problems. Perk of being in Pyramid. Shout out to Miss Rodriguez, best teacher in the world. I like being optimistic because it opens your eyes to all the possibilities in the world around you, and it gives you the drive to put in 110% to what you believe in every day and every moment when you get the chance. And there'll be times where you won't be able to be optimistic, but one thing I like to do, I like to stick it out with the optimistic mindset so that I can overcome any kind of adversity that comes in my life. And with most things, you know, you can't have one without the other. And I think what's key is maintaining a balance between the two. Out of the two, I tend to be more optimistic, and I try and maintain that balance. So, yeah, that's what I would say. Try and maintain a balance between the two.
Yeah, kind of going off of what Deondre said, I kind of found myself, like, I was really optimistic growing up. So as I transitioned into like middle school and high school, I found that being optimistic kind of didn't really work in my favor because I was setting goals that were too high for myself. So kind of finding that balance has really helped me in high school. And I think there are some pros and cons to it. Like, being optimistic can really bring a lot of like positivity into your life, but being realistic can help you stress less in a way, because then you're not setting goals that are too high for yourself. Like I was kind of saying to everyone earlier, that you can't save the world by yourself, even though like you want to. Like, it's not really realistic. So I think finding that balance is a way that I found myself to get through high school and recently through the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To add on what...
Go ahead.
Okay. To add on what both Deondre and Adrielle said, I do like to view life in an optimistic perspective, because I feel like I'm pushing myself to view different situations in a more different way, and also push myself to my goals. But at the same time, some of my goals that I set for myself would be unrealistic. So having like realism part of my life would definitely help make sure like I keep like a proper balance between all aspects of my life.
In a way though, I feel like when you try to set the boundaries for realism, it's not the same for everyone, because everyone has passions that they want to do and sort of accomplish in life. Some people plan out their entire lives starting from high school, and having this sort of rigid structure isn't really healthy, because it's always fluid. Everything is always going to be changing. So trying to stick to one thing is just going to end up like not really benefiting you in the long run. But it's also good to really set a realistic standard for that, and the only person that can really set that expectation for yourself is you. So it's good early on to really focus on your more passionate side, so that you can really test the boundaries, see what you're capable of and what you're capable of doing over this sort of short period of time. And if you're like good at multitasking, if you're good at doing multiple things at once, then at that point, then when you're going off to college, then you can really set like goals for yourself and just general plans, but not necessarily create like this sort of rigid, like this has to happen now. And yeah.
Dean, what you said really resonated with me, because when I was reading this question, I was like thinking, I don't really know, like if you were to ask me if I'm a pessimist, optimist, or realist, I really wouldn't know what to say, because I feel like I'm like an optimistic realist, if that makes any sense whatsoever, because I feel like realism, or like as we know it, realism can be optimistic within itself, because it's like, you know, being realistic to me is like, you know, being fully aware of like the good and the bad consequences of what can happen, but still putting your trust in yourself, and also just like the way that things are going to work out anyways, and that in itself brings a lot of peace and like stability in my life. But what you said really makes a lot of sense, how you can't really enforce like your boundaries of what's realistic or your standards of what's realistic onto another person, because it's really all relative. So that brings me to like a little bit more of a philosophical question for you guys. Like, okay, so I was thinking, like, as humans, right, like we're wired to perceive like every element of life as a potential threat, because that's just like a survival instinct, right? So it's like something that can jeopardize our physical health, mental stability, like, you know, personal stability, or like our sense of identity. But since we're innately like emotional and like intuitive creatures, do you think it's within our capacity to be truly realistic? Because like the dictionary definition of realist, right, is like one who's unbiased, like emotionally detached from what is reality, right? But does an objective reality exist if like our understanding of it is colored by human error and human emotion?
Sorry,
that's like
okay. No.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a very loaded question. But here, I have like an example to sort of pause it. So if you had some sort of sentient AI, right, like some robot, and then you told it to solve the world's problems right now, then it would try to commit genocide on all humans. Because if you really think about it, we wouldn't really have problems if it weren't for human greed, human error. And so if you told, of course this is relative, because all the world's problems doesn't necessarily connote certain things, but like we started global warming, we expanded beyond our carrying capacity, and the thing that really sets us apart from just being that sort of logical creature that wants to kill everything is our morals and our sort of care for each other. And to a lot of people that sort of extends to different groups of people. So some people emphasize friends more than family, and some people extend that courtesy to other animals. But to really sort of set a boundary on that is something that you can't really do in a way. It's just, everything is too fluid in order to really set that boundary for anyone. So so just being purely realistic isn't really necessarily the goal, but defining that reality, I think, is also impossible. So it's weird.
Yeah, I feel like there's no real reality in a way, because everyone's like reality is like different, and then like when you think about it, like the way that people are optimistic are kind of based on like what they have gone through that define their optimism or like define their reality. So I feel like there's like kind of what everyone was saying, like it like everyone has different conditions, so I feel like you can't be like, oh, like this is like reality for everybody, like this is optimism for everybody kind of thing.
Actually, something that I found interesting though was that the person who submitted the topic kind of put optimism and realism almost as if they were like opposites, like as if realism was parallel to pessimism. And I guess like when you're comparing sort of realistic expectations to passions, that makes sense in a way. But of course, as Mia said, it's not like mutually exclusive. Like you can be realistic, like purely realistic, and still be an optimist. And so it's kind of odd to me, like the phrasing of the question initially, because we really have to sort of define the limits of both optimism and pessimism, and then also clue in realism.
No, yeah, I noticed that too when I was reading it. Like, I feel like optimism and pessimism are kind of on that same scale, and then like realism is like like on a different thing, like a different spectrum. So I feel like you can't really compare, like directly compare the two, because there's no really like comparison. Like I get like optimism and pessimism because they're kind of like opposites, but I feel like you can be pessimistic and realistic, and you can be optimistic and wait, did I say that correctly? Like
I got it.
Like you can be both. Yeah.
Like being a realist, like like they're both like two sides of the same coin, you know, like you can't have one without the other, so to say. Like you couldn't consider one to be more evil than the other because both of those have helped mankind survive for as long as we have. Because we're optimistic to make change and to innovate, we're optimistic to go out in the world to explore and to renovate. That's what that's what made us here. That's why technology is advancing way faster than it normally should, I guess. But like I'll say that like without one or the other, like our lives have been shaped over the balance of the two.
I think with
sorry. Go ahead.
I think it's we should keep in mind of like trial and error when it comes to having optimistic and a realist perspective, because like we mentioned earlier, we need to have a balance. We mentioned about having balance between these two perspectives, but it's kind of like a journey trying to find like the midpoint between the scale of optimistic and realistic perspective. So I feel like as we like grow up, we are just exploring having these two views and maintain like the balance of having positivity in our life, but at the same time being mindful of like of current situations.
Yeah, so that got me thinking, like, Deondre, what you said was a really good point about how we need optimism or just like positivity in order to push us to move forward, because I think that brings to mind like one of the faults of being too realistic. Because for me, I think if you focus too much on what is tangible or like what's right in front of you, it causes us to be a little bit stagnant or like complacent, because we just surrender to whatever's like right in front of us, and we don't really push past these like mental boundaries, and we don't really entertain like our imagination. So I feel like it's definitely, I agree with you guys that it's a balance between being optimistic and also realistic, but that also makes me wonder, like, should there be a balance between like being pessimistic and realistic? Like, is there any merit to pessimism? Because I feel like realists can also be a little bit pessimistic, because I feel like our need to like rationalize everything and like think of things in a purely logical sense stems from like our fear of like the unknown, and like we need to have control over like our reality, so we perceive it through like what makes sense, like math or like logic or stuff like that. And I feel like to some extent like people can be realist because we can't handle the fact that our minds are malleable, they're really impressionable, and we need to cling to like this hard truth that doesn't really exist. But it's like reality is really relative. And yeah, it's like it's a difficult thing to wrap our heads around. But back to my original question, like, do you think there's any merit to balancing pessimism with realism?
No, yeah, I like what you said, Mia, because I feel like, so I said I was like really optimistic, and then there's a point in my life where I was like super pessimistic, but then it made me realize like my boundaries in my life. Like, I feel like I was super like reach for the stars kind of person, and then like I had a point in my life where I was like I was not, I don't want to say like negative, but like I wasn't the same person I was before. But now I like find that balance. So I feel like it's kind of, for me at least, it was like a realization point of like I can't do everything that's like out of my reach. Like I'm kind of like, it kind of taught me that like I'm in control of what I can control. Like I can't control like anybody else's emotions or the way they act. Like I can only control how I react and like what else I put out to the world, that kind of thing. So I feel like there is a merit, but it's kind of different for every person.
Like someone had to look up at the sky and just like, you know what, I want to see what space is like, and then someone just like, well, why do you want to go to space? There's literally nothing in space. Nothing can survive in space, and if you do go up there, what are we gonna find? The only thing we can find is these bright things in the sky, But then it's because of the fact that we're optimistic of finding something more, diving into the unknown, finding out what's in the unknown. I think is something that really shines in humanity, and without it, yeah, like I said before, we wouldn't be where we are today. And and also like not also pointing out that that realism doesn't do the same. It does the same, but it doesn't do it in the same way, so to say. Like realism kind of like works in the background to kind of contain the optimism, so to say. So it's kind of like a cloak and dagger kind of thing. Like you really can't have one without the other.
Yes, I love that show.
Well, like, okay. Wow, okay. I feel like that's a really, like, interesting, like, idea to posit. Just okay, well, if you think about it, start of civilization, we go all the way back to, like, sorry, I'm going really far back.
Here we go. AP word.
Yeah.
Beginning of civilization. We didn't do anything. We just banged rocks together, and we hunted food or something. I don't know. But then eventually, like, we decided, hey, this is a seed. Plants. We can eat this. And then all of a sudden, there was no need to really worry about survival anymore, because you could live in a group. You can grow your own food. You can basically do things apart from just surviving. And in a sense, that's kind of the breaking point for all this sort of beginning in the first place. So this idea of objective reality, and that's how, like, sort of religions came about, is because everyone started thinking, what if there's something more than just survival? And that's how written language came about. That's how communication happened. And all of a sudden, we're here. We wouldn't even be able to sort of debate this idea if it weren't for the fact that, like, how many thousand years ago, someone decided, hey, this is a little thing and I'm going to put it in the ground. So when you try to define objective reality in that sense, you can't really do that because it doesn't exist. Like, it's something that we sort of made up. So when you try to go down that field, it's kind of a big rabbit hole. And it sort of, like, leads to other objective arguments, like, does time exist? Which we might talk about in a future episode. And just all these other, like, ideas of, like, is God real? Is there really any sense of why we exist? And when you think about it that way, it sort of leads you to believe, like, does it really matter in the end? Does it really matter if we debate over this? Because ultimately, this sort of comes back to what we said at the beginning, is that you have to make up what your own purpose is. Because if you get caught up in trying to define what is real and what isn't, for anyone, making a standardized version of it, then you're kind of missing the point, because there's no way of doing it. So really, the only, like, option there is to just sort of make it for yourself.
100%. That was, like, literally to a T, like, what I wrote down in my notes, actually. And, like, I think it's just so cool. It's, like, kind of, like, paradoxical how that, like, example that you brought up, and, like, Deondre's example that he brought up, is, like, it just goes to show how, like, optimism and, like, realism kind of, like, it's like a positive feedback loop. They kind of feed into each other, because, like if you think about it, okay, so, like, realism, it's, like, based on logic, right? And it's, like, you know, like a intellectual understanding of the world. But, like, I guess, like, the pillars of realism, or, like, you know, what we base our logical interpretations of the world on, was really just the product of somebody's optimism. Like, for example, like, I forget who it was. I don't want to, like, misspeak, but I think it was, like, Copernicus who came up with the idea that, like, oh, maybe the world, or maybe the universe doesn't revolve around Earth. You know, maybe it's, like, Earth that revolves around the sun, and there's, like, everything, you know, there's more to more to this universe than just us. And like obviously people were like, oh no, that's false, you know, like everything revolves around us. But in the end, like it turned out that he was right. We still don't really know if he's right, but I mean that's what we accept as true. But but you know, that was the product of his like idealism, and I think that we need to like get rid of this notion that, you know, being or like trusting your intuition and like entertaining like what the impossible is like a bad thing. And like I definitely 100% agree with like what Dean said, that it's really kind of futile to keep trying to label something and like give form to something that can't really have form, because like, you know, as you said, like reality is super fluid and it's relative towards everybody. And like, you know, I don't know if I'm like quoting somebody, but the way that I see it is like true reality doesn't exist, but rather an infinite number of interpretations of it. So we shouldn't be wasting time and energy like trying to confine like our consciousness to like optimistic, pessimistic, realistic, when in reality they're all like interrelated. You know, there's no like objective standard that we can gauge which one of those like, I guess like philosophies is more valid or sound than other people. So anyways, moral of the story, just stop caring about everybody. Honestly, stop comparing your thoughts to everybody. Like literally, it doesn't matter. It really does not matter. But I kind of wanted to talk about it in like terms of politics. Dean, like you mentioned that, or you were talking about like apoliticalism earlier, and I was interested in like how you interpret this in like the context of politics.
I kind of wanted to touch a bit on this, like if we ever talk about the election, but the general like idea is that people vote with three things, and that's their mind, their heart, and their gut. And that's kind of like how I separate the three like separate like our three like branches of consciousness. So mind, which is sort of like our logic, our emotions, which is our heart, and then our just general instinct, which would be our gut. So putting all three into context, you would sort of imagine our logical center, our mind, to just sort of be the realistic view. So that would involve logic, statistics, stuff like that, right? And then when you think about your heart, that's emotions, that's the more optimistic view. So your passions, like what you believe in. And then the gut is kind of like, it's something different. It's really something that sort of like comes in between them, because when you really come down to it, like your instinct would be your ultimate decision. And so going like either emotion leaning, which someone considers to be liberal, and then logic leaning, which would be more conservative, it's really what drives us as humans to be just sort of to sort of have this response to a decision or some sort of argument. And so when you think about a realistic point of view, it's okay, let me like put this into like sort of like a, not like necessarily a political perspective, but just a thing, right? So when the district decided to cut a ton of programs for students, they took the sort of logical point of view that we need to cut all these projects because it's going to eventually help students in the long run. It's going to bring financial support back to the district. And so a lot of people like came in droves and to protest this because it disadvantaged the students now for students in the future. And there's not really a correct answer to that. So it's that sort of like emotions versus logic argument that you can't really disadvantage students more than other students. It's sort of this argument of equity between the past and the present and the future. And so when you sort of come down to it, when you have this sort of three branches of consciousness, when you move forward in life, generally you're going to take a more realistic stance. When you exhaust your passions and you realize that it's not equitable for you, or not equitable, but like just realistic. It just sort of ruins your perspective on how you can really work for other people. And it's okay to look out for yourself. If anything, that's like should be your first priority, but it shouldn't be your only one.
So yeah, cause like me personally, like I believe in some of the conservative beliefs and some of the liberal beliefs at the same time. Like I'm not exactly like one over the other, and also tie into like it would help save money and hopefully provide us with supplies and everything that we need in the future. But at the same time, those extra programs were an outlet for most students, that it gave them something to look forward to after school. It gave them something to work for, and it opened a new possibility for them. And that you can think about it logically and and emotionally, that like tying back to what we were talking about earlier, that you really can't have one without the other, which I think is really is something that we as humans can't escape as much as we try to deny it.
I thought it was kind of interesting how you associated like liberalism with emotion and conservatism with like logic, but I feel like I'm not really sure. I feel like there's both emotion and logic in both of those parties, or both of those like trains of thought, because like I was thinking like going back to like the point we were making earlier, like do you ever wonder like why there's two parties in the first place? Like these two groups are living in completely different realities, and they're living by truths that have been carefully crafted like since the very beginning of this country, like by a handful of people, and it's just continued on for generations. Like there's biased reporting, there's cherry picking, propaganda, and it's like it brings me to wonder, like, you know, are these debates even like worth having? Because, you know, I feel like there's a point where you can't reconcile the two beliefs, because we're both like living in two different versions of reality that are so different from each other that, you know, they're like parallel lines, like they're never gonna be able to see eye to eye. And your example of like the district is also really interesting, because it's like they made that decision based off of so-called logic, but that logic is a projection into the future. And like I talked about this in the last episode, oh my god, but it's like, can you really logic your way into the future? Because there's no like predicting it, you know? So in that case, in that specific example, would logic trump like emotion and like the present needs, like what's directly in front of you? Because I feel like that's more of an instinctive decision based on like the standards that we set in this conversation. So yeah, I was wondering about your thoughts on
that. I have something to say, but I'm going to
timestamp.
Yeah.
Wait, can you say it again? I don't know.
I went on like a tangent. I don't even really know what I said.
No, she said something along the lines of like in terms of like the example like that I posited earlier about the district, like what? Sorry. Like what?
Trump.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, does logic trump emotion when it comes to human problems? I'll say that instead. Okay.
Well, okay. Yeah.
Let me rephrase. So, let me rephrase that, we can continue from here. But, okay, so I guess, like, to make this a bit more general, or, like, a specific question, it's like, if human problems are really the result of human error and emotion, or, like, emotional biases, does logic really trump emotion when it comes to dealing with human problems?
It, of course, depends on the situation. Okay. Oh my god, this is hard.
Yeah.
This is so hard. I don't even know my own answer. What the heck?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you really put it into the context of that example, you can really go either way. Because if you are sort of... If you're like me, and you believe that the future can't really be determined, it's not rigid, it's always in motion, then you could honestly go either way. Because if you say that this would be better for the district in the future, then that, I guess, makes sense. You know, like, it's setting up for the future. But at the same time, I'm sort of led to believe that, like, can you really say that for sure? So, like, because the future is always in motion, so therefore, is it really worth trying to end all of it right now? Like, restructuring the entire district just to eliminate debt that they caused themselves. So it's really difficult to, like, sort of ascertain what would work, because then if you are on the other side, you could also say the future is rigid, and so if you do this now, then you're going to hurt those students, like, now in their future. But then at the same time, if you think that it's rigid, you could also think that doing so will help students in the future. That it's really like a sense of, because after that you have to sort of bring in prioritization of individuals and the needs of different groups of people. So that goes to teachers, administration, students, and all that. So sort of bringing it back to the whole realism versus optimism thing, it's really dependent on circumstance and individual views. The way that you grew up is nothing like anyone else's, regardless of how similar you are. Because if you will always develop a different mindset than someone else based on what you see, what you feel, what you hear. And having that sort of difficulty sort of emphasizes the need to compromise, both with other people and with yourself. And that goes back to mindset. So when you really think about it, optimism is good to sort of fuel your passions and sort of test the waters to see what's realistic. And realism sets those boundaries for you.
Yeah, yeah, you hit it like spot on. Like when you said it's like circumstantial, because yeah, if we had the money to continue the programs, then they will for sure continue the programs, taking into account how to make it's feel. And like I'd say that goes to like a lot of debates. It just depends on the circumstances of the stance of the stance of the debate itself.
So in that case, it just sort of, it always keeps reverting back to the same idea that it's too complex. We can't really like put it into an idea where like everyone can agree, because even when you compromise, there's going to be a disagreement. So there's not one tell-all answer to this question. The ultimate question, just, is there one that trumps the other? Because there's not really. You have to decide for yourself whether that is in motion. But I feel like we should be using this as an opportunity to make a guide for people in order to sort of find that sort of balance. Because if you are a lower class person, you sort of started from the bottom, then obviously your aspirations are going to be high, and you might either want to play it safe or really go at what you believe in. And in that scenario, your priorities are going to be different than someone who started at the top, someone who's the heir of a long-standing company that is very successful. Because then you can either decide to continue that legacy or do something else. Like it's really not ideal to try to put that into context for someone else, and especially for the person that asked the question to begin with. And if it was me, then I would use my passions to sort of do as much as I can now and set those boundaries and really just decide that for myself later.
So I think this is a good place to recollect and revisit the original question that was posed by our student submitter, which was, is it better to be an optimist or realist, taking special account of the situation that we're in right now with like COVID and everything that's going on. So I think it's a good point to turn it into more of like a guide for how they want to decide that for themselves, because to tell you whether or not optimism or realism is better than the other would just contradict everything that we discussed today. But personally, I feel like because the truth is so fluid and because we don't really know the reality of what reality is, I think that's so liberating to be able to define your own truth and your own perception of the world in the way that serves you the most, I guess. Because I was reading a peer counseling textbook and it made a really good point about how there's a Chinese character, I think is what it's referred to as, and it's composed of two different parts. There's one part that means crisis, and there's another part that means opportunity. So I think you can look at a situation objectively, but how you want to perceive that and alchemize that into something that serves you and your purpose in life depends on your priorities and what you value the most. And you shouldn't have to confine yourself to these labels of optimist or realist in order to take that and realize that control that you have over your life.
I think there's no definition. There's no like set definition, but my advice for you would be to experiment a little bit, and it's a lot of trial and error to know that balance and know your limits. And obviously it's going to be different, and so don't compare yourself to other people's limits or passions or goals, because like you're your own person. And kind of what we were saying earlier, like don't compare yourself to other people because it doesn't matter. But it's a lot of, just remember that your life is your life. Like your goals are your goals. It's all about you.
Okay, that was a bit of a selfish way of phrasing that, but just sort of to reiterate what I was saying earlier about just finding your passions and using that to guide your realism. There's going to be a lot of people out there who would absolutely just say, take risks because there's no point in having any regrets. And there's not really a basis for that. I feel like there's a lot of people that take that stance, but there's so many other factors that sort of limit you, and just sort of having this can-do attitude all the time isn't necessarily always going to be what's beneficial for you in the end. So as I said, just let your passions guide you and know your boundaries so that you can set those limits.
So yeah, I like say like that kind of mindset kind of like reminds me of like gambling. You know, you can't just like gamble like all the time. You know, so sometimes you gotta know when you cut. Sometimes you gotta know when to cut your losses and step out of the casino because like that's what comes to the factor of taking risks. You can win everything. You can win everything you could possibly want, and you can lose everything at the same time. Is that and not having a balance and knowing when to gamble and when not to is. Yeah, it's key. So yeah, I'd say that'd be a good example of what Dean was trying to say.
Yeah, I agree. What we have talked about today. It really there's a lot of factors when it comes to a lot of factors going into this topic, and it really depends on you. What with like your priorities and what's your current situation in your life right now. So like what Adrielle said, trial and error, try to explore these two perspectives, and eventually you'll find your balance between these two different views.
And I think like even if you don't find a quote-unquote balance between the two, that's not something to feel ashamed or afraid of, because it's also important to remember that realism and optimism aren't like these dichotomous, like mutually exclusive things. You can be like a realistic optimist, like, which is like what I consider myself to be, because it's like, I don't know, realism I think is really just about being present and perceptive of what is happening in your life situation. Like you can identify those things without like an emotional lens. But the optimism where it comes in is, you know, like taking the cards that you've been dealt with and deciding to play them in such a way that turns life into something that happens through you and for you rather than just to you, which is like what a pessimistic realist or just a straight up pessimist would believe. And I think like too often we associate optimists with, you know, being like these bearers of toxic positivity or like living in these delusions that life is going to work out okay every single time. But that's not really what it is. Like optimism is an active behavior as much as it is a mindset. And it's more so about being patient and not resisting whatever happens to you, because you know that there's something that can be gained from it, whether that's like a good or bad thing. I don't know if this is making sense. Like you can cut this out.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to end off.
I'm so bad at articulating everything.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Don't worry about it. I won't cut it out. But even this part, I'm not going to cut this part out. That's fine.
Because you know, because when you tell to someone, I'm assuming they're gonna have the same kind of like reaction, you know, because it changes how you see everything. Because if you take that mindset, you apply it to everything you do, like then you'll be able to do it to the best of your possible ability, you know, because then all the excuses come out of the way, you know, like I'd say it's a lot to take in, but it's something that, it's something that, you know, if you miss something, you know, go back on the podcast, because, you know, this is like real like life stuff, you know. This is something that everybody should know, that it shouldn't just be us 5 debating about it. It should be more people debating about it and finding out their limit and their limit and their balances. So
all right, so I think that's a good place to end off. Thank you guys all for tuning in to the podcast, whether you're listening on Overcast or Google Podcasts. I don't know where we are, but whether you're just listening to this or you're watching from YouTube or IGTV, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you took something out of it. Follow us on Instagram and Spotify and YouTube and all that. I'm going to turn it over to Mia to sort of close us out.
Yes, thank you, Dean, and special thank you to Deondre for being our guest speaker for this episode. If any of our listeners would like a chance to be featured on our next episodes, please feel free to check out the link in our bio at OHS West Wing on Instagram for the form if you're an interested speaker. And if you have a burning question, request for advice, or just any topic in mind that you'd like us to address in our future episodes, there's a Google form that you can fill out for that too. Also, if you have any constructive criticism, something you really like, or something you want us to change, we're just a DM away on the Instagram too. Tune into our next episode, in which we'll be talking about the social hierarchy and social cliques of high school. Thank you so much, Eagles. Bye!